My name is Christina Corral. I'm PAVE's Director of Educational Programs, and you are joining webinar number 2 in a series of 3 that Parents Against Vaping E-Cigarettes is putting on for the state of Nevada with the wonderful, generous support of Washoe County Health District. I'm joined by Mimi Boblik, who is a founding partner of Parents Against Vaping, and she's going to be speaking this evening with Dr. Jose Cucalon Calderon. I just want to let everyone know, well, in Spanish, si están aquí para escuchar en español y si prefieren escuchar en español, tenemos 2 canales de audio. Así que si quieres escuchar en español, hay un botón ahí en la parte de abajo de la pantalla de Zoom que dice Interpretation, dice English and Spanish. Si haces un clic ahí, puedes cambiar para escuchar en español. Y si tienes problemas con eso, avísame en el chat y puedo ayudarte a escuchar en español. So we're going to be doing the presentation tonight in English and Spanish. We have both languages on almost all slides. We have some resources that are only offered in English, so those are in English, but otherwise, we hope that we can make this really accessible in English, Spanish, and in ASL. So thank you to all of our interpreters that are on the line. And I'll pass it over to Mimi. Go ahead. I think we're all set.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. As Christina mentioned, I'm Mimi Boblik. I live in New York and I'm a volunteer. I am a founding partner, but I, like the founders themselves, are all volunteers, and we have a whole host of volunteers across the country doing what we're doing now, which is trying to educate parents because our kids are, really exposed to these products that we're going to talk about tonight, which are e-cigarettes, and they see them all over. They see them in the high schools, they see them in middle schools, they see them on the street, in the bathrooms, in the school, everywhere. So it's just really important that we as parents get educated. And we have a lot more information now than we did when Juul was launched. And Juul is the culprit in 2018. Juul was sort of the original product that our kids were really enticed by. And I myself have a daughter who was then 17, started vaping, and she believed it was completely safe, believed it didn't cause any harm, didn't know there was nicotine in the products for good reason because there was no labeling. So our kids really got duped by these products, and parents didn't know then, and many don't know today, what they look like and the health harms. So I am so glad to be joined tonight by Dr. Cucalon Calderon, who is our resident expert. I will share with you his incredible list of co-chair and general pediatrician. He actually works with the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is phenomenal, working as an e-cigarette champion, which is a really important role. And we're really grateful to have him speaking tonight. And we're just gonna have a chat. We have some questions that were given to us by some of you, but please feel free to put any additional questions in the Q&A. If you have any, we're happy to answer them. If we don't get to them tonight, we can certainly email you with any information that we have. One thing I just want to mention is that for people on the call and listening and watching, our real main mission as PAVE, and I'll just share with you, we're really about protecting kids against the dangers of e-cigarettes through educating parents and other adults about the dangers and the health harms of e-cigarettes, and by empowering volunteers in their own communities to go out and help fight against really big tobacco in their communities by changing the laws and changing regulations. We're really about kids, protecting kids. We do not try to tell adults what to do. We don't really study the health harms of adults. We know about the health harms for adults, but really we're about talking about the health harms for kids. And that's why our resident doctor is a pediatrician tonight, and he's going to share with us his knowledge. And anything that we have has been sourced in terms of PAVE information has been sourced by experts like Dr. I'll call him Dr. Jose for ease, but by Dr. Jose, because we have partners all across the country that are very helpful in giving us information. So we're not making things up, just so you know. And before the doctor starts answering questions, we just want to show you some of these devices, because very often when we do these presentations in person, we might hand some of these out. And very often we get, big eyes by parents who go, oh, I think I've seen that in my kid's backpack, or I think I've seen those little pods, those little plastic pieces in the bedroom, and I didn't know what they were. These are all devices. These are not all devices. There are thousands and thousands of devices, but these are some popular ones that kids use. So it's just kind of important to, take a look at them. There is one called Puff Bar. Many of them are disposable now. So unfortunately, it makes it even easier for kids. First of all, they're very inexpensive. They are easy to dispose of. They don't need to conceal them in their backpacks or pockets. They can just use it and use it and use it until it's gone and then throw it away. The ones on the upper right are not disposable. And those look kind of like a flash drive. So sometimes teachers and parents can be fooled by thinking that they are part of a computer or device. But these are, this is, the silver one kind of is what Juul would look like. And the little pods, the little pods go into the device, and that device does not get thrown away. But when the pod, which is filled with e-liquid, is vaped and it's empty, those pods get thrown away. And then finally, in the lower corner, the right corner, are bigger devices where you fill the device with loose e-liquid. And part of the problem is that there are over 15,000 very kid-friendly flavors of e-liquids that kids will pour into those and then use those. But I think the more popular ones are the Juul and the disposable devices. So we just wanted to show you what those look like so you're aware. Unfortunately, these contain a ton of nicotine. So every one of these is about 200 puffs, and that is about 1 to 2 packs worth of nicotine that you would find in a cigarette box. So 1 to 2 packs of cigarettes worth of nicotine in each of these devices. It's a lot of nicotine, and as the doctor will tell you, it's quite addictive, and it's really alluring to our kids. So, doctor, let's start with one of the first questions that we got, and we get this a lot. Is this product safer than smoking? That's one of the first questions. And then to a follow-up with that, are there signs or symptoms that I would see in my child's health? So maybe we could start with the first one. And welcome, by the way. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for the nice introduction, for the walkthrough, and including me in Vape's such important advocacy work. I'm honored to be here today. One thing that I want to point out after seeing the slides for all of the different type of devices, or the more common ones that we use, is that most of them look like something else that are of common usage. And if you think about it, the reason why they look like a flash drive, or they look like a liquid paper dispenser, or a tape dispenser, or it's because they are designed in shapes that actually are meant to be concealed, so they can blend in with everything that you have in your kid's backpack. Keep that in mind, because that also will point to some of the likely talking points we're going to have later as we go along. Going to the question here. So it depends, to be honest. Currently, there is no recommendation to breathe anything into your lungs other than clean air. You are going to have some of the same and some different risks than you do by inhaling combustible tobacco smoke, either by using or by being exposed second or third hand. one thing that is that we know for sure is that the aerosol that comes from e-cigarettes is not harmless. We have health complications that continue, that we have more and more health complications since we started, since this became more prevalent in the use by our teens, that continue to show up in the literature. And I am almost 100% positive that this is not going to be the final word on it. It's probably going to continue being the case. Not only do we have a heated liquid that has a significant amount of different components that are actually similar or the same to what you get from burned tobacco, including levels of levels of formaldehyde, acrolein, and other chemicals that are well known to cause long-term lung damage, as well as increase the risk for cardiovascular disease like heart attacks and stroke. But also we have to contend with the fact that the metal coil can end up shedding some metal particles in it, and which can also cause inflammatory changes in the lung, or at least that's what it has been associated to that. So in right now, some of the data that is coming out, especially after the experience in Great Britain, is that for certain adult populations that have used vape e-cigarettes as part of treatment for people who have chronic lung disease secondary to combustible tobacco, they have had a very small benefit, but that's on adults who already have had a baseline medical condition and already ongoing health complications from using tobacco. That does not apply to our kids. Our kids are going to benefit from breathing clean air in and out. They are going to benefit from not getting addicted to the high levels of nicotine that these devices can dispose very quickly. They benefit from not having increased cardiovascular risk secondary to some of the other components, which can lead to some of the more common causes of cardiovascular disease, which are heart disease or stroke at an early age.
Yeah, and interesting, you mentioned the word aerosol, right? So I think what most of us didn't know is that, it's called vaping. And I think the industry was very smart, because I think if they called it aerosolizing or something, it would sound disgusting and no child would want to do it. But vaping sounds really cool, but it's really not vapor. And there's 0% water vapor in these products, right? They're aerosol. And that's like what comes out of hairspray and things. So they're inhaling things that, aren't meant to be inhaled, and they stick to your clothes and your hair and on, children's, on carpets and things that kids use, right? So another third-hand smoke, I guess you would call it, third-hand danger.
Absolutely correct. And this is an ongoing field of evidence collection, as we know, because as more time goes by and people use these devices, more health complications are showing up. So that's going to be there is definitely no point in talking about it being harmless, because it's not. And then this is definitely not going to be anything water-based. These are chemical fumes that get aerosolized from the liquid being heated by the metal coil inside, and all of that ends up in the environment, in your clothes, and as well as in your lungs, likely causing long-term damage.
And can you talk, you mentioned a little bit about the brain and nicotine and the brain. Can you talk a little bit about the developing brain and how nicotine affects the developing brain?
Absolutely. So so nicotine has a very interesting way of working in the teenage brain. You have to consider that the teenage brain has not finished maturing, and that the reward centers that nicotine appeals to and stimulates are not going to be mature until you are like probably mid-20s. So having this setup is going to start triggering and creating a response in the teenage brain that is going to make it easier for them to have higher degree of nicotine addiction even after a single try. You have to also add that this can be dose dependent as well. And all of these devices, they release nicotine as nicotine salts, which normally are easier to absorb. They cross the blood-brain barrier quicker. The dose in each one, there is no specific regulation as to the amount, as to the specific dosing that each one of these devices have in their pods, as well as they come flavored and they don't cause a scratchy throat. So you have a lot of things that actually are going to contribute to the nicotine working in this specific situation at a much higher dose in a much faster way.
Yeah, these nicotine salts you mentioned, this is something that Juul designed, yes, and now other companies are using. And I think it's very alluring to kids because it gives them this nice, they call it like a brain rush, like a, a nice hit to their brain. And that's is that the dopamine release? That's the pleasure transmitter in your brain. Is that what that's doing?
So that's right. And that's going to be it's going to reinforce this pathway, and it's going to trigger it at some point once the nicotine levels drop to try to do it again. And then you end up having you can have nicotine withdrawal symptoms pretty early into its use. It has been described that even after the first try, you can end up having not only the symptoms of nicotine, like a ongoing need for nicotine, but also nicotine withdrawal symptoms as well.
Okay, well, we'll get into some more about the mental health issues too, and the connection between mental health and addiction and why kids are using. We talked a little bit about the toxicity of vapes. I just want to share this with you, and maybe you could talk a little bit about this because it's kind of scary.
Absolutely. So we have as you can see, we have a significant amount of things that have been reported to cause harm. So harmless would not be a word I would describe using the aerosol, and then not only that, but also bringing it home. If you're working in environments where people can use e-cigarettes, you are probably getting some of it yourself, breathing it, as well as getting it on your clothes and maybe bringing it home. So this accounts for second and third hand exposure, which can affect your children's and your other family members' health as well. There are multiple, a lot of these chemicals are going to be directly associated with lung damage, like we talked about. Some of them are going to be associated with increased risk for cardiovascular disease. And then some of them are going to be part of the culprit that can increase. Some of them have been associated with increased risk for lung cancer. Right now, because all of these products are so new, there have not been associations that are as strongly clear as there are for tobacco, which we have had all of these studies coming in since the 50s. So, but we probably will come at some point.
And what's interesting about some of these, you might notice, they might be food additives, right? So we might add these to foods, and the FDA has approved them to add to our food and ingest into our gastro system, but they have not been proven safe to combine with other chemicals, heat at high degrees, and inhale into the lungs. And as the doctor said, only air should be inhaled into the lungs, but some of these, once combined, heated and inhaled, are really not safe for anyone, but certainly not our kids, right?
And then we have some of these are even made by our own bodies, chemical processes, but there is a specific pathway to be able to get rid of them through our different organs, not at the lung level though.
Yeah, thank you. And then since COVID, we haven't heard a lot about this, but prior to COVID and the news around COVID that sort of took the news, the news feeds by storm, we heard quite a bit about cases of seizures among kids who were vaping nicotine. And in fact, we have we know a few families whose kids have had seizures due to strictly vaping nicotine. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
So yes, there were reports up to 2019, late 2019, about cases of seizures happening both in people who as new onset seizures and as triggering seizures in people with a known seizure disorder. Currently, what the CDC has requested is for people to actually, if this happens, to go to their webpage and report these using as much specifics as possible. There is not a clear understanding as to why this might be happening, but their request comes from being able to identify what the main trigger was. The other thing is also if your child has a seizure and you know that they are using any of these devices, then it would be highly recommended for them to, like a new onset seizure or a worsening of their seizure pattern, if they already have a seizure disorder, for them to be able to be seen as soon as possible by a medical expert who can give them a full assessment.
And it might be, this is one of the things that's been very tricky. I think if you go, let's say you have a seizure or you have an issue, then you go to the hospital, some doctors may not be asking yet to kids, are they vaping? And if they are vaping, they might not want to say in front of their parents. So it might be hard to distinguish, what's a seizure from something else versus a seizure from too much nicotine. Right?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. We have no way of knowing how much nicotine children are getting from their devices, other than what they report of use. Like we said earlier, the fast absorption, the lack of regulation, and the presentation that nicotine salt, like the way that the nicotine gets dispensed and absorbed, can help explain a lot of these things. But we right now the recommendation is to be able to increase awareness and be able to create more data to be able to better assess it.
And I think it's important for kids to understand that how much they're actually using, how much nicotine they're taking in. Very often kids share vapes, so they don't necessarily know how much they're taking in a given night. But if a kid goes through a vape, that's, again, 1 to 2 packs of cigarettes. That's a lot of nicotine for a small body, a developing body. And so I could see that you could have health harms like potentially, seizures, which we've heard. There were quite a few cases that were reported to the FDA. And those are just the ones that people knew about, right?
That people know about.
Probably more, yeah.
Absolutely. And then there are, because we don't have the regulation, there are different amounts of nicotine content in each one of these devices. So we have a Juul pod can have there is a description by the Stanford toolkit that they can have as much as 41.3 milligrams of nicotine in the device, and then one Swarren pod can have as much as 90, which is like 90 cigarettes. One cigarette is 1 milligram, so that's a lot of nicotine that people can go through very fast with a very high absorption rate.
And I don't think it's sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just don't think kids understand what it means when they see on a label, it says 6% nicotine. 6% of something doesn't actually sound like a lot, but that is a ton of nicotine.
Yes.
And they don't know how to convert to milligrams and all of that. It's very misleading, and it's, I think, intentional, right? So I want to talk a little bit, and we're going to go back to nicotine vapes, but there are vapes out there that don't contain nicotine. And some companies, and I'll just show you some of these, some companies are marketing them as wellness products. Vape your vitamin E, vape your vitamin B, vape your melatonin if you're having trouble sleeping. There's a lot of products out there that are marketed that do not contain nicotine, but look very similar and have very alluring marketing to kids. and are sold in places like Urban Outfitters, which
Yes.
is, you know, where my kids like to go and look around. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about those. Are they safe for kids? And you know, should our kids be using those instead of a nicotine vape, or what do you think about that?
So you are still aerosolizing chemicals with a heated metal coil that is and putting all of that in your lungs. That is not going to be healthy. Again, the suspensions are probably very similar to what we are using for e-cigarettes and the e-liquids. They might have nicotine, they might not have nicotine. Since we don't have a regulation, we actually don't know. But that's going to be part of the problem. Then the other thing is you are seeing things like melatonin, B vitamins, and other things. And we don't, are they actually being able to be used and absorbed that way? No, but there is nobody who has to say yes, because there is lack of regulation for any of these products.
Totally unregulated, yeah.
One thing that calls my attention as well is that you have all these flavors there as well, great, but all those flavors taste nice in the mouth, but they also end up in the lungs. So that's the other one. The other piece of this is that I see Urban Outfitters. We see Afterpay for a $20 cost for a personal diffuser. I see 3 very young people on the advertising. So the marketing is clear. The target is clear, and that is extremely dangerous because it is advising children and very young adults things that are potentially harmful to them, that can end up causing long-term health problems. And up to a point, it is even taken away from their power to choose what, because this is what is supposed to be cool. This is what, and then
you normalize it, right? It normalizes this behavior.
Exactly right. We are normalizing something that with marketing that shouldn't be the case. That can end up causing a lot of long-term health problems.
It seems like that normalization could lead to sort of a gateway to vaping nicotine, right? Because now I'm used to it. I understand how to, you know, use it, and it looks really cool to me and my friends. And what's the next step is just to start with nicotine. So it sounds like maybe it's better to get your vitamins orally, taking a pill if you need to. My understanding, there was a scientist who was doing a study on the vitamin B and said that the molecules are too big, they don't get absorbed by the body. So it's just marketing. And because no one's really watching these right now, they can say what they want in terms of, you know, making health claims. They shouldn't, but it makes it seem like these are really healthy. And
if it helps, I signed the Urban Outfitters pay request for them not to sell this at their stores. I signed
Thank you so much.
2 days ago.
Oh, that's so kind of you. Yes, Christina, who opened for us tonight, actually wrote that letter. We wanted Urban Outfitter to be held accountable and understand that these are being targeted to kids and our kids are buying them. And he never responded, but the letter is out there and we hope that maybe someday they will. So yeah, thank you for that. So let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned about lung damage. I think some concerned parents are wondering if the lung damage is irreparable, if it can't be reversed. I do know we have cases of friends in our community of, you know, families from PAVE whose kids actually have had lung transplants because of vaping. It's not always that severe, but I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that to the parents.
So the description of what we had right before COVID, which was the big pandemic and was showing, or the big epidemic here in the US, which was being shown all over the news, was the EVALI cases, which is the, oh my God, e-cigarette associated pneumonitis or lung inflammation. There were a significant amount of cases described, with 80% of them being described for people who used both e-cigarettes and certain types of aerosolized marijuana products that had something called vitamin E acetate. The thing there is that there was still a 20%, which is a significant amount of people that did not have that association made. So even though the vitamin E acetate was considered as the bigger culprit, there are a lot of different other things that also likely led to this, or even a combination of different things. As this is certainly new, then COVID hit, and we had something much bigger in the news and in investigation and in research and everything else. We up to now, we still don't have a clear answer on what that 20% of people had, but we had deaths all over the United States, especially in the young adult group, who and not only that, but we had also people that ended up requiring lung transplants. Right now, there are people who had irreparable lung damage, and that is a very high, and that is possible, and it is likely. It is unclear right now if there is if there is a strong association with baseline lung problems or with co-use with combustible tobacco or with combustible products or with other brands or with, because we don't have enough data yet.
And it could be decades, right? Till we really fully understand, because your kids with developing lungs, and we might not know until their 40s if, what they could have been. And it's even hard to know because they don't have a baseline, right? But
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And then not only that, we know that it can lead to this. So what's keeping your child from having it?
Yeah. And also I think COVID may be confusing things. First of all, we know that vaping makes you more susceptible to COVID because it weakens the immune system, right? So I think also the stats on lung damage might be confused, because if they had COVID and they vaped, and so what caused the lung damage? So it's going to be a while till we know, right? And one question. Oh, sorry.
No. So just to add to that idea, yes, the people sharing something, putting it in their mouth when we have bodily fluid transmission, breathing it out in front of each other, doing like, then people sometimes use these devices indoors, and then you also have the consideration that that COVID actually invades some of the tissues in the body using the nicotinic receptors. And if you are using them and creating more of them by high doses of nicotine, then that actually opens the door for COVID to have an easier way in.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you anecdotally with my own daughter that when she stopped vaping, she really noticed that she could breathe more easily. I think it was only then that she realized that she was damaging her lungs. And I think it scared her, which is maybe good. One follow-up question that we had about the vapor, there's secondhand and third hand. Can you talk about whether the vapor is dangerous to people nearby, but who are not using e-cigarettes themselves? This is a question from someone tonight.
The answer would be yes. Again, everybody should be breathing clean air. If we are getting exposed to people next to you inhaling this aerosol, then you are probably going to have, to a smaller degree, the same risks as the person who is actively using the device. And then, so a lot of these chemicals are not going to get just blown away in the wind. They are going to stay in your clothes, your skin, your hair, and you can bring them back to your house and then you go home, you have a newborn baby, you pick it up. So I would estimate that it has a similar pattern as with the transmission of the chemicals from combustible tobacco. Then in our state, we have a special consideration, and that is that we have a significant amount of the workforce working in the hospitality industry where we don't have indoor clean air in areas where children are not allowed. So gaming areas and bars are exempt from our indoor clean air legislation. So the question would be, what happens to people who work there for long shifts, number one, after a certain amount of time? And then the second one is, what happens to their children once they go home and they sit down to play with them after a long day of work?
It's on their hands and they can.
Yeah, especially if those kids if we're talking about risk, we know that at least for combustible tobacco, which also is within that exclusion in gaming areas and in bars, we already know that it complicates like a significant amount of different medical problems, especially the most common chronic disease of childhood, which is asthma.
Yeah.
So
we need to teach our kids to advocate for themselves, right? And then stand up for when they're not comfortable if people are vaping around them, perhaps, right? Which can be hard, but it can be done, and they can be.
I would also encourage parents to have that conversation with their employers if that is something that is occurring to them, because they are bringing things home.
Yeah. Thank you. So let's continue our conversation about the brain, because I'd like to understand, we talked a little bit about addiction and how nicotine can rewire the brain for further addiction. I think one thing that we'd like to talk about is the link between mental health and addiction, because my understanding is that there's almost always a direct link between some mental health issues and addiction. And especially with COVID and just all the pressures that kids have today, there's heightened anxiety, heightened depression in our society and in all of our communities. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, and also how the cycle of addiction happens, so that I think they feel like they're self-medicating and it feels good early on, right? It makes them more calm and less anxious, but then the addiction takes over and it makes them more so, right? So can you talk a little bit about that?
So we talked a little earlier about the cycle that keeps people coming back from nicotine addiction. So one of the more common causes that teenagers across the country have listed as the reasons why they like vaping is the fact that it cools them down, that it makes them calm down, that they become less anxious. The question is, so we do that, you might end up having that small momentary benefit from the nicotine dose that you get, and then you end up having the exact opposite once the nicotine starts wearing off. So it becomes a cycle, and then you end up you add there the fact that you also have the immature teenage brain that makes it likelier for that to happen. Besides, teenagers we have a significant amount of data pointing that up to a certain degree, risk-taking behavior is normal for teenagers. It's part of finding their place. They're defining their personality traits and all of this that happens through these formative years. But if we have an ongoing concern, such as depression, anxiety, and they are using the nicotine to treat it, then what's keeping them from trying something else and using it in the same way? And that's where the risk-taking behavior and the link to self-medicating for mental health conditions would be a very likely way of linking both of them. Not only that, but there is data right now about e-cigarettes being a pathway for posterior teenage marijuana use with a couple of models. Even I don't remember where the study came from, but they were proposing a model of behavior that actually that led from e-cigarettes to trying a vaping device. Then not only that, they already have a device that can deliver marijuana, with marijuana being easily accessible, especially in states where it has been legalized. So,
and kids know how to jerry rig the device so they can take, once the e-liquid was done, they can put in THC oils, which is, and use it for that purpose. It's not great. So
the risk there would be the self-medicating for mental health problems. We know from adult data that at least with tobacco and the nicotine addiction that comes from combustible tobacco, that there is a very strong link with mental health diagnosis. With teens, I don't think that we have data that is that specific yet.
Thank you. And I see we have still a little bit of time. I want to make sure I get to all of our questions. We can do this one pretty quickly, but it is really important. Underage sales. How are these legal online, and how can I stop my child from buying online? And from the shops are still selling them. They are still selling them. I can tell you, when my son was younger, he's now 18, I used to send him into bodegas and convenience stores and gas stations and just try to buy vapes, and he was never turned down. So they're really accessible. I think especially now, people need money. They want to make revenue in their store. Mm-hmm. They are very accessible online. I will say, to their credit, a number of the big mail companies like FedEx or and so on are saying that they're not selling vapes through mail anymore, but kids can still get them, and we've had people test that as well. So it's really hard to stop. I would say that you can look at your child's, if they have Venmo or any kind of online purchasing, I would say look at those and see what they're, and ask them the question, if you see some, withdrawals that you don't understand, talk to them and see what they're buying. And if you happen to be home when the mail comes, stop and look what it is, because sometimes it's not marked and you really can't tell.
The other thing that I would recommend is that talking to your local advocates or such as Vape or the health department, or even going at the CDC webpage, you can report where they are buying these products if your child is underage, and you can show the proof of purchase, and that can lead to change this way. The other thing is that talking about legislation in each one of your states is definitely going to allow for people to be able to have clear guidance on this. Here in Nevada, we are talking about the point of sale purchase. We are talking about children not being penalized for buying something, but actually the seller being part of that, which is now part of the Tobacco 21 legislation that came federally.
And that's very important, I think, for parents as well. This is really not about the child, but the person selling it should be punished. And to your point, I just put up these sites where you can go and report violations, and you will be heard. It really is important for all of us to do this. If we find out that our kids or other kids are able to buy products at stores where they shouldn't, and they're underage, then you can report them, and it really does make a difference. So wanted to share those. So can you talk a little bit about reasons that kids vape, why they start? And we have some list here, but if you want to add to these as well and just talk a little bit about this.
Absolutely. The peer pressure has a lot to do with it. We have if everybody in their group during the time when they are forming their personality, knowing what they like, what they don't like, there is a certain degree of risk-taking behavior that comes along with the age and this process. You are going to have people who are going to do it to fit in. then the other piece is that this happens as early as middle school, where we have a percentage of children starting in middle school. And the other big things is the other really big thing is that they are marketed for them. I don't think to this point I have actually seen any e-cigarette marketing that is not showing a picture of somebody having a good time who is very young. I don't know if they still have them, but before Tobacco 21, they would have people who were brand ambassadors in colleges, where they would go to the parties. If they were 18, they probably went also to the people who were a little younger using their vape devices there, and they were hosting multiple events. They were hosts for music festivals, and all of these were being shared by these companies again and again and again, of young people having fun.
And it worked, right?
And it worked.
5.3 million kids vaping within 2 years of Juul being launched. That's a tremendous amount.
Exactly right. And then here in Washoe County, we have had a couple of movements over the last few years, but we have had, from as compared to 4 years ago, we have had triple the numbers now.
Yeah.
So this pattern is repeating itself in a lot of different places in the country.
Yeah, it's so easy to hide and conceal from parents. We hear kids sleep with them under their pillows because they're so addicted. They can't, wake up in the morning and not have it. They're really easy to conceal. They're easy to use. And one of the big things for us, which is why we fight so hard with the legislation, is the flavors really are hooking kids. To the doctor's point, these come in so many kid-friendly flavors, and most kids who start, pretty much all kids, almost all kids, 85% start with flavored products. So, and we know 85% are using flavored products, high schoolers and middle school as well. It's just flavors are hooking the kids. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do in communities like yours and like ours is getting those flavors off the market. And we have been successful in some places across the country, but it's really been a long and hard fight. But we believe that if you took all the flavors off the market and just left flavorless and tobacco flavor, would maybe perhaps help some people get off smoking to vaping, to switch to vaping, although we've been finding, I think data shows it's more dual use now. But if we could get the flavors off the market, I would go a long way in helping our kids, I think. So. Absolutely.
When Tobacco 21 came into effect, a lot of all of the flavored devices went sideways, except for the replaceable cartridges, which is why part of the reason why the replaceable cartridges started shooting up in sales. And that's right now where we are with this.
I think you talked about most of this already.
Yes. So, and it's.
Yeah. And the idea that it's, lower risk than cigarettes. They think it's safer than cigarettes, right?
I have had that conversation with parents here in the office multiple times. And once we talk about the known health consequences and the possible health consequence that we still don't have enough data on yet, normally, or in my experience, that has led to further questions and then to a change in behavior at some point.
And so with all of this, I want to get into some of the relationship issues and discussions with kids, because it's so hard sometimes to have these conversations. But what age do you think is appropriate to start the conversation with kids?
So before you end up being exposed to any of this is probably the time. I would probably recommend before starting middle school, maybe as young as 3rd or 4th grade, asking, specifically doing probing questions about non-judging probing questions about what are your, if their friends are doing anything, if they have heard about this topic, and things like that, because that will give you an idea of if there are people around around your child who are using this, even at a young age, then your child is having this included into his daily conversation and might be likelier to try out of curiosity or peer pressure, risk-taking behavior. You can call it anyway, but the idea here is trying to keep them from trying and then understanding that that there are health consequences associated with this.
Mm-hmm.
I had not that long ago, I had one of the local schools called me to actually do a presentation to fourth graders about this and to fourth grade children and parents, because that's how early they were already starting to have it available, and they confiscated like 10 devices in their class. So that's so.
If they have older siblings too, perhaps they're exposed to it here. And
so the big question there was having the conversation, yes, but where did they get it from?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Was the big follow-up one.
Yeah. And you know, you did touch a little bit about this, but what should you say when, you know, what can the kid do? What can the parents do? I mean, I think one of the things that we like to say is statistically, it is a lot of kids are vaping, you know, 20+% in some cases, over 25% in some communities. But that still leaves 75% that aren't. So if you're at a party and it feels like everyone's doing it, it's, I think, comforting for a child to know that actually the statistics show that not everybody's doing it, even though it feels like it. Absolutely. So how can they talk about it?
So the first, how can I, what I recommend is, first of all, finding out if like I said, if their friends if their close friends are doing it, maybe asking if they have even heard about it, or what do they know about electronic cigarettes and about the aerosol that comes out. Being specific and not using the word vapes is probably going to be also a good way of doing that, because you want to use the full word and the association that this is an inhaled nicotine delivery device. And then that might end up making it likelier that for them to realize that there can be health consequences associated with it because you're using the word cigarette with it. The other way is after probing is sometimes just having quiet time and in a non-judgmental way, as in like, are you doing this? Just asking, okay, so can you tell me if you have tried, or what do you think about people who try? And then and then seeing where that conversation leads. Kids are likelier to not want to tell you something if they think they're in trouble. So the probably having as much of a non-judgmental conversation is going to be key here to be able to open the door for that discussion to happen. But having the discussion is the really important topic, as well as talking about the health consequences that can happen later down the line.
So this is a great segue to the next question, because sometimes it's very hard to have these conversations. Yeah. Sometimes teenagers want to close you out, and sometimes it feels like you could be actually damaging your relationship. So this parent is asking, how can they talk to their child without hurting their relationship? And you mentioned a little bit being non-judgmental about it, coming at it from a place of curiosity. Is there anything else that you can add to that?
Well, I would start seeing talking. So sometimes the conversation between parents can happen in a probing manner, and then sometimes you need to have a medical expert having that conversation as well. So if you feel at any point that you are not in the right place to be able to talk to your child about this topic, then looking to your healthcare provider probably is going to be your best next step. if your child,
they're as educated and equipped with, as you are about it, right? We have heard of some pediatricians saying, well, at least you're not smoking. And maybe that's old news. Maybe they are more informed now about the health harms for kids, and they wouldn't say that today. But I'm not sure that all doctors are as informed right now yet.
I think that things are changing, and thanks to thanks to the work that people that we do, and the training that people are getting now in residency programs as well, is including a lot of these into their curriculum and leading to change. The important thing here is going to be trying to be able to portray the information about health consequences, about addiction, about what addiction can bring to their brain development, and the fact that they are being targeted by marketing and by companies trying to sell these products, because that takes away from their liberty. So sometimes talking about their liberty and the right to choose is going to be a good way, because if they are getting marketed this heavily, then they don't have a right to choose. They're getting bombarded everywhere. So, and then not only that, then you add the peer pressure to it, you're going to have a double whammy. Then asking about or looking for symptoms that might make you think that or might bring concern about any untreated mental health problem or condition, such as depression or anxiety, which are going to be the two more common ones, also would be another way of being able to bring this conversation to the pediatrician or their primary care provider, because they can be treating something by using the e-cigarette, which can lead to other problems later down the line as well. Sometimes they don't want to talk about it, but they are still open to you printing out something from My Life, My Quit and leaving it there for them to review, or from the materials that Vape has, or from the American Academy of Pediatrics, or healthychildren.org.
That was one that just came up on the chat, which is to go on the healthychildren.org about how to talk to teens about vaping, which is great.
So bring in resources. Parents, please look for resources when you're trying to have this conversation, especially if you expect any difficulty or you are unsure how to have this conversation. And resources includes your pediatrician, your primary care provider, and the multiple different scientific evidence-based information websites that are accessible free for you to use and review.
Thank you. So we only have a few minutes left. I'm wondering how we should prioritize. I wanted to share some resources at the end, just so you have them. But what if someone's child smokes, or the parents smoke or vape in the house, or or around them, or that they're doing it?
So the health concern, the specific health concern I would have there is, of course, for the child, it's, do you have health concerns from using an e-cigarette device? But if they are getting exposed to the aerosol and tobacco and combustible tobacco, like from all sides by every single household member, then that is definitely not going to be in their best interest. Having parents who are sick from or having health complications from the combustible tobacco or from e-cigarette use will also increase the risk for there being added sources for toxic stress for this child. And that can also lead into a cycle of having anxiety or depression, because there is a strong link between toxic stress sources that is continuous and repeated, leading into mental health concerns for the child, and then using the e-cigarette device as a way of treatment or to treat some of the symptoms. The other one is that the modeling behavior. We don't have much data on what the parents, the model behavior by the parents, how much does it impact or having it accessible at home, how much does it impact the kids' chances of being able to pick up an e-cigarette and start using them? We just don't know. What we do know is that there are health consequences, that if you are using and getting exposed to things are much likely to have health consequences. And then if your parents if you have it available at home, you are going to be likely to use it as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's interesting. Yeah. So this is one for people who don't live with the child. How can they support a child who they don't live with? And you mentioned, going to an expert, which is an interesting idea. Is there anything else, maybe aunts or uncles or people that they rely on to help support them?
So when you have, and this is a tricky one, because as you know, the different states have different laws about partial, I don't know if partial emancipation would be the right way, but partial medical decision-making emancipation. And that includes, and for most states, it includes birth control and substance abuse and I believe also mental health in certain states, mental health concerns in certain states. There is if you have a good relationship with the child and they are your godchild for some reason, and the door is open to have a conversation about health consequences, I would tell you to take it and try to be able to share information in a definitely the same way as with a parent, in a non-judgmental way, probing about what might be going on, what they might be using, and then providing resources, even if that resource is something that is not accessible to them at that time, like their primary care provider.
Yeah.
We know from data that most people most children who vape think about quitting all the time. So it might be that the only thing that they need is the push for them to be able to go and talk to a medical provider who might be able to guide them in that way, or maybe just mentioning the fact that there are resources online for them to look up if that door is open. But those would be the ways that I would recommend being able to talk about it.
Really interesting thought that, kids are thinking about quitting all the time. There's probably a lot of shame around it, a lot of, concern and fear, and not wanting to share how addicted they are. And it's been very hard, I know, for a lot of families. And so I think just being open and being able to have open conversations is probably a great way to start in a non-judgmental way. We are out of time, but I wanted to ask this one final question before we share our resources with our group and then get a little QR code to share. What scares you the most as a doctor about this epidemic?
Well, everybody needing a lung transplant. Or finding out, I don't know, 5 years from now that there is a very specific cause for very early onset cancer that will end up harming people in the worst ways possible. Or finding out that we have that the brain effect of this high level of nicotine or brain toxicity from some of the chemicals ends up leading to other things.
So the unknown, we don't know.
Yeah. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Like I said, we know health consequences. There are going to be more showing up over time because nobody's meant to inhale any of these chemicals or aerosol into their airway for it to get absorbed into the bloodstream and end up going everywhere in the body, because this is a systemic problem. It goes everywhere. But what we don't know yet is probably going to be the scariest thing. Then the other one would be what happens if we have another pandemic like COVID? We have people who already have, we have now these teens that have become adults who have been using these devices for some time because they are addicted to the nicotine or they are partially treating a mental health concern. What happens 5 years from now when we have another pandemic? Are they going to end up getting hospitalized or having worse medical outcomes based on that? we just have no way of predicting that, but it's possible.
Yeah.
Well,
I really so appreciate all the input that you've given us today. I hope that parents have found all this helpful. I do want to share some resources. These are local resources in Nevada for you all. If you were happy to share them, happy to share other resources that we have. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can always reach out to Parents Against Vaping E-Cigarettes. I also want to ask you all, this is a QR code. We would love, I know all of us are so used to QR codes now with the menus, but if you all could kindly just go on this QR code. There's a very short survey, not only to get feedback on what we did well and what you would like to see more of, but also if you want to get involved and join PAVE as a volunteer, we always are looking for volunteers. We are so grateful for Dr. Cucalon Calderon tonight for all of his expertise. I'm so grateful for you. That was so interesting and engaging. And I know the work you do every day is critical because you work with our kids. So thank you for everything you do. And
if I can add one more resource,
yes,
the quit lines. Please consider the quit line. Also for 1-800-QUIT line for your state. You dial the number and you are going to end up getting resources that are state-based, connected to their service, which will include counseling as part of a nicotine addiction treatment.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a great resource. Thank you. That's fantastic. Well, we could all use more doctors like you in the world, helping to fight the good fight. There is a poll that's just come up on your screen. If you could just kindly fill that out. It's one question here. We greatly appreciate all the feedback that you give us. So again, thank you for everything. And if you have any questions or want to get involved, please feel free to reach out to us at Parents Against Vaping. I'm Mimi Boblik. Christina Curel is in the background there. I want to thank all of our interpreters and everybody who made this possible tonight. So thanks again.